Hey guys, tonight we're heading to one of the sleepiest, smokiest corners of the ancient world, a place where the scent of fresh bread floats through narrow alleyways and soot-blackened ovens glow before the sun even rises. You're standing in the middle of one of the oldest cities in Mesopotamia, and your shift at the bakery has just begun. The clay walls around you are still cool from the night air, and you shuffle across the packed dirt floor as the first rays of dawn slip through a slit in the ceiling. The bakery isn't quiet, not really. There's the dull thump of a baker kneading dough against a stone slab. A wooden paddle clatters against the side of an oven. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes in a cloud of flour. You probably wouldn't survive this, by the way. Just a heads up. Between the heat that burns and the open flames, there's no OSHA here. No minimum wage. And your only bonus is maybe getting to lick honey off a leftover crust. Still, it's oddly peaceful. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from your bed tonight, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little journey travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You reach for a rough linen cloth to wrap your arms. Mornings are still chilly in even if you know the heat is coming. Outside, a donkey brays. Somewhere, a temple gong echoes faintly. You blink and stretch. You've got just under an hour before the first fire must be lit. The ovens here are no ordinary hearths. They're squat, round structures shaped like giant urns sliced in half, known as tanners. Each one sits on a stone platform and has a wide belly tapering toward the top like a reverse chimney. The inside is coated with black soot and the ghosts of 1,000 loaves past. Most of the bakery's crew sleeps nearby in small rooms layered with woven mats and unfinished dreams. You know the drill. Roll out of bed, slap on a dusty tunic, and start moving. There's always dough to shape barley, to grind wood, to scavenge. As you approach your workstation, a pile of flattened barley dough is already waiting. The air smells faintly of sour mash and smoke, a scent you no longer notice, but visitors wrinkle their noses at. Someone mumbles good morning. Another grunts something about a mouse stealing sesame seeds. The head baker, let's call him Enki, waves you over. He's got a beard long enough to tie back with twine, and his tunic carries the scars of a dozen close calls with the tanner's flame. Enki was probably born here in this very bakery. His only days off are festival days, and even then, he usually shows up to check the heat. Fuel's running low, he mutters. Find palm fronds if you can. No goat dung today, it smokes too much. You nod. Palm fronds it is. You head to the courtyard where a pile of dried fronds crackles underfoot. They're brittle light and ideal for quick-burning kindling. If you're lucky, you won't have to brave the communal dung pit behind the tannery again. You carry the fronds inside, stacking them next to the oven. Already, someone's begun sweeping ash from yesterday's fire, gently preserving the glowing coals beneath. That's how you'll start today's fire. Not with matches, which haven't been invented yet, thank you very much, but with patience, timing, and a well-fed ember. As the coals catch, Enki mutters a prayer to Nikasi, the goddess of fermentation, and unofficially bread. He does this every morning, half reverence, half superstition. Historians still argue whether this kind of ritual was formal religion or kitchen habit. Either way, it seems to work. The first batch is for the temple. Always is. The gods get theirs before the scribes, the soldiers, or even Enki. These loaves are shaped into discs with a stamped seal, kind of like a heavenly loyalty program. You tap the center of one with a carved shell press in a sun symbol, and lay it on a thin pad of wool to rise. It's warm now, very warm. The tanner glows like a quiet sun. You brush the sweat off your neck with a dusty sleeve. The dough goes in by hand, slapped against the hot interior wall of the oven in one fluid motion. If you hesitate, it falls to the base and burns. If you go too fast, it sticks to your fingers. If it lands right, it sizzles softly and begins to puff. Somewhere a child sneaks a date from the pantry. Someone shouts. A baker curses. A donkey brays again, less patiently this time. You glance up through the roof slit and see the sky turning blue like wet clay drying under the sun. Another day begins, and you sleepy-eyed baker of Ur are already halfway through it. The tanner hums like a living thing now. Its rounded clay shell holds the heat deep in its belly, and you can feel it pulsing through the air, even as you stand a few paces away. Your hands still carry the ghost warmth of the fire, even after you rub them on your tunic. If you've never stood near a tanner, imagine an oversized clay flower pot turned upside down and heated until it could toast your eyebrows off. There's no door, no neat iron handle. Just fire breath and timing. You lean in to feed more palm fronds into the base, careful not to smother the fire. The trick is to build the heat gradually. Too fast, and you scorch the dough, blackening the crusts and infuriating Enki. Too slow, and you delay the temple delivery, which invites the sort of priestly wrath that somehow always ends in fewer rations for the bakers. The tanner's design is ancient, but ingenious. You're essentially working with a convection oven before anyone even coined the phrase convection. Heat rises from the central flame, curling up through the tapered chimney at the top, while the walls radiate warmth outward, baking the dough slapped onto them. No pans, no parchment, and certainly no timers. It's all about feel heat on your skin. The hiss of dough hitting the wall, the soft bubbling rise of barley starches as they brown and crisp. You don't watch the bread cook, you listen to it. Some tanners are small, just big enough for a family's dinner. Others, like the one in your bakery, could feed half the neighborhood. The wall is pockmarked with dark scars, reminders of clumsy apprentices or aggressive fuel stuffings. You add a few more fronds, hear the whoosh of flame licking up, and step back. Back in the day, you'd also find early versions of these ovens all across Mesopotamia, from wealthy estates to dusty street stalls. The clay itself came from the banks of the Euphrates, mixed with straw and pebbles, then shaped by hand and fired in the sun. Some bakers even added bits of crushed bone to their oven clay, believing it tamed the fire spirits. Historians still argue whether this was mystical nonsense or a practical solution to thermal shock. Either way, that bone-baked clay did seem to crack less. You reach for a flat paddle carved from date palm wood, its edge smoothed by years of use. Enki hands you the next dough, round this one larger, shaped like a flattened melon and already sprinkled with sesame seeds harvested from the southern farms. Carefully, you tilt the paddle and slide the dough against the inner wall of the tanner. The heat greets it with a soft sizzle. In seconds, the outer crust stiffens, while the interior puffs gently like a sleeping cat rising and falling with breath. There's something oddly soothing about it. Even in the blur of noise, flour heat, and Enki's endless muttering, this quiet moment, the dough rising just so, is a tiny meditation. Not that you can meditate long. The bakery runs on a tight rhythm. While one batch bakes, another is being shaped, and another is fermenting in the shadowy cool of the back room. The tanner must stay hot, but never too hot. It's a balancing act worthy of a temple acrobat. As you check on the loaves, your fingertips brush the outside of the oven. Warm, not scalding. Just right. You knock gently on one finished round. It sounds hollow, like a small drum. Perfect. You lift it out with a looped reed hook and set it to cool on a woven mat. A few loaves in Enki points to a small crack forming near the base of the oven. Patch it before the next batch. Use the silk clay, not the ash mix. It'll hold better. You nod and head to the repair jar. Every tanner has its quirks, its weak spots, its favorite fuels, even its moods. Some days, it bakes like a dream. Others, it sulks and burns everything in sight. No one quite knows why. In fact, bakers talk about their ovens like people. She's in a mood today, someone might say. Or he's greedy, needs more fronds. Some swear, if you whistle near a baking loaf, it rises better. Superstition, probably. But you've seen enough lopsided loaves to keep your mouth shut and your rituals intact. And speaking of quirks, remember how your tanner has no door. That's not an oversight. It's by design. The open top lets heat rise fast, cooking the bread quickly and evenly. It also means someone's always on ember duty, ready to feed the fire, or adjust the airflow with a slanted reed fan. Today, that someone is you. You wave the fan lazily, feeling the heat surge up. A puff of ash swirls in your face. You sneeze. Enki doesn't even look up. The bakery smells incredible now. Sweet barley toasting sesame, a hint of date syrup from someone's secret stash. If you're lucky, you'll get a bite of the rejects, the misshapen loaves, the ones too brown, too thin, or too soft. You don't mind. Bread is bread. Outside, the city is stirring. You hear sandals scraping down the alley, the low creak of a market cart, the murmurs of temple attendants arriving for their breakfast offerings. You're already 2 hours deep into your shift, and the tanner, still glowing like a sleepy dragon. You glance over at the fuel basket. It's nearly empty. Again. That's the third time this week, and it's not even mid-morning. So you grab a reed sack and head toward the alley behind the bakery where the less glamorous side of Mesopotamian baking comes to life. Because here's the not-so-glorious secret, Babylonian. Ovens didn't just run on chopped wood or tidy logs. Oh no. They burned whatever the bakers could scavenge: palm fronds, dried reeds, even animal dung, baked into little cakes and stacked like ancient charcoal. The dung, while fragrant, was surprisingly efficient. When dried properly, it gave off a steady heat and was readily available thanks to the goats, donkeys, and cattle of the neighborhood. You wrinkle your nose as you approach the dung rack, an elevated shelf lined with flat brownish discs, stacked like cookies you'd never want to eat. Each one carefully form-dried under the sun and carried in by some unlucky apprentice who drew the short straw. Today, that's you. You grab a few, trying not to inhale too deeply. Back at the tanner, you feed the fire one disc at a time, watching the flame respond. It takes skill. Too much, and the oven flares too high. Too little, and you get cold spots. It's like tuning a very angry musical instrument with flames instead of strings. As strange as it seems, now this wasn't just a Babylonian oddity. Across the ancient world, fuels were whatever people could spare. In parts of North Africa and the Near East, dung remained a primary cooking fuel for centuries. Historians still argue whether this was due to necessity, cultural habit, or a combination of both. After all, wood was scarce. Forests were few. Waste, always abundant. You glance toward the side of the tanner where the latest batch is nearly done. A soft knock on the crust produces that same satisfying drum sound. Hollow, crisp, perfect. But now, the tanner needs a fresh wave of fuel. This time, you switch it up, adding a handful. You've finally found your rhythm paddle in one hand, dough in the other. and that warm blast of air on your face as the tanner breathes steadily. By now, you don't even flinch when the fire snaps or a pocket of flour explodes in a tiny puff. It's just background noise, like the distant hum of street sellers hawking figs or the occasional donkey grumble from down the alley. The loaves are rolling out fast now. Some are simple flatbreads, just barley flour water and a sprinkle of salt. Others are more elaborate, meant for temple rituals or the governor's breakfast table. Those get brushed with oil, pressed with little thumbprints to hold date syrup, or decorated with patterns using a carved stone stamp. The designs are more than decoration, they're identification. Like labeling your leftovers before someone accidentally eats them. As the morning warms, the bakery heats up with it. You dab sweat from your brow using the hem of your tunic and reach for the next stack of dough. Then you pause. This batch isn't quite right. Too soft. Sticky in the wrong way. You glance toward the fermentation room. Ah, of course. The sun's shifted, and with it the temperature of the bakery has changed just enough to throw off the rise. You knew it was coming. Every Babylonian baker does. The moment when the sun gets a little too high, the heat a little too fierce, and the dough a little too opinionated. This is why serious baking starts before dawn. Not just because of the heat from the ovens, but because the air itself turns into soup by mid-morning. If you try shaping dough in the early afternoon, it will stick to your hands, to the paddle to your neighbor. It will rebel, split, and sulk. Enki calls it the dough's revenge, so you adjust. That's what bakers do. You roll the dough thinner, give it less proofing time, and maybe if you're bold, add a pinch more salt to slow the fermentation. But only a pinch. You remember the tale of a young apprentice who got creative with the salt once. Let's just say that bread ended up feeding the goats. The sun now slices through the bakery in slanted golden rays. You can see dust motes dancing lazily in the air. The scent of toasted grain is thick now, warm and earthy, with a hint of sweetness from the loaves resting near the tanner. You step away for a moment, stretch your arms overhead, and breathe in slowly. This is the part of the day when most of the city begins to slow. Babylon isn't like your world, where people fight sleep with caffeine and deadlines. Here, once the sun reaches its peak, people duck into the shade. Nap rest whisper stories to each other in cool corners. You've still got a bit of work left before your rest. You prep the next batch carefully, laying the dough rounds on a low shelf near the wall, far enough from the heat to avoid premature crusting, but warm enough for a gentle rise. You drape a cloth over them to keep off the flies. Not that the flies care. They're bold here, buzzing around like they own the place. Back in the main room, an apprentice drops a paddle. The sharp clatter jolts Enki awake. He was pretending to inspect the flour sacks, but really, he was dozing with his eyes half open. Careful, he growls, you'll crack the clay. The paddle's fine. The apprentice slightly more shaken. The mood is slower now, hazier. Even the fire seems less aggressive. The tanner no longer roars, it murmurs. You feed it one more disk of dried dung just to keep the belly warm, enough to finish the last few loaves of the cycle. Somewhere outside, temple bells ring. A low chime carried by the wind. That means breakfast deliveries have started. A runner barefoot, barely older than 10, bursts into the bakery with a folded wax tablet. Enki takes it without looking. Probably an order from the temple kitchen. 6 loaves, 2, with dates, 1 extra crisp. You gather the requested bread wrap, them in woven reed trays, and send the boy off with a nod. He vanishes, like smoke, into the midday heat. And now, at last, comes the lull. Not the end. There's still cleaning, patching, reshaping, but it's quieter. The fire settles. The bread cools. The workers talk softly or hum wordless tunes, too tired for real conversation. You sit near the wall, sip some warm barley tea, and let your body cool off. Your tunic sticks to your back. Your hands are caked in flour. Your feet ache, but somehow it's satisfying. Historians still argue whether these early bakers were respected craftsmen or just the underfed underclass. The records are patchy. Some temples treated their bakers like sacred workers, essential for feeding the gods. Others taxed them so heavily they might as well have baked for free. Either way, they were central to the rhythm of the city. Because, in Babylon, bread wasn't just food, it was currency, worship, identity. You weren't a citizen unless you could account for your rations. And those rations measured in loaves. You lean back your head, resting against the cool clay wall. Your eyes drift shut for just a moment, soothed by the warmth of the tanner and the quiet murmur of resting bakers. You've earned this pause, and in a few hours, the cycle will begin again. You're still sitting near the wall, your legs stretched out and arms resting heavy at your sides when the second shift shuffles in. They're younger, louder, and still two clean faces, unmarked by flower tunics, unstained by soot. You give them a look. Only someone who's been up since dawn can give equal parts tired amusement and gentle judgment. Among them is a tall girl with an awkward stride. She's new, barely into her first week, and already working the mixing trough like her life depends on it. It just might. Because while bakeries in Babylon aren't exactly cutthroat, there's always a sense of urgency. After all, the city doesn't sleep on an empty stomach, and bread doesn't rise out of sympathy. You pull yourself up with a groan, brushing crumbs off your tunic, and wander over to check on the next set of temple loaves. These ones are different shaped, with squared edges, and marked with a spiral seal pressed from a carved stone. They're sacred loaves, not in the abstract, bless this meal kind of way, but in this loaf is technically a divine offering and might get smited if handled wrong sort of way. These will be carried by attendants through the temple courtyards, placed in a quiet shrine and left for the gods. Or, at least for the priests, to remove later and feed to temple workers. Your job. Make sure every one of those loaves is perfect. No cracks, no uneven browning, no lopsided symbols. You steady your hands and begin shaping each one with a kind of reverent patience you didn't even know you had. In Babylon, barley bread isn't just breakfast, it's the stuff of ritual. Entire hymn tablets have been found praising the act of baking. In one fragment, the goddess Ninkasi is said to pour the sacred mash that causes the bread to rise. It's unclear whether this was metaphor or instruction. But either way, someone once sang to the yeast. You hum under your breath as you press the final spiral. The dough is soft but obedient, warmed just right. And the tanner is ready, its heat low and steady, now ideal for baking the sacred batch. You slide the first loaf in, whispering a little nothing more out of habit than belief. Beside you, Enki is preparing the sesame glaze. It's not a true glaze in the modern sense, just a mix of water and pressed sesame paste brushed on during baking for shine and flavor. You remember the first time you tried to make it. The water was too hot, the paste too clumpy, and the resulting spread looked like curdled goat's milk. Enki laughed for a week. He hands you the brush, now a reed bundle bound with twine, and nods toward the loaves baking inside. You wait for just the right moment when the dough begins to blister slightly, then lean in to brush a quick glaze over the crust. It sizzles on contact, releasing a nutty aroma that fills the room. If heaven had a scent, you think it might smell like sesame and ancient fire. The temple batch is nearly done when the priest's apprentice arrives. He's wearing robes too clean for someone who claims to have walked all the way from the ziggurat. He sniffs once audibly, as if evaluating your work with his nose alone. Enki, never one for ceremony, waves him off. Hot bread waits for no one, he mutters, packing the loaves into a padded reed basket. The apprentice bows, stiffly, collects the basket, and leaves without another word. You imagine him marching down the avenue, acting like he baked it himself. Typical. As the door curtain flutters shut behind him, you look around the bakery. The sacred batch is gone. The morning's offerings are done. And now finally, the rest of the loaves, the people's bread, can begin. These are the round, soft-bottomed loaves, shaped quickly and meant to feed everyone from scribes to sailors. Some are flavored with honey or dried fruit, if someone's feeling generous, but most are simple barley water salt. Honest bread. You join the second shift at the mixing trough. It's warm, sticky, and smells faintly of sour mash. The girl beside you is kneading too hard, smashing the dough instead of coaxing it. You nudge her elbow. Gentler, you say. Think of it like folding a blanket, not fighting a goat. She laughs. Her dough improves. You feel mildly proud. Meanwhile, Enki begins reading from an old tablet, half instruction, half poetry. Something about honoring the grain, blessing the hands, and watching for cracks. Historians still debate whether these chants were functional memory aids or sincere ritual. Probably both. When you live by fire and flour, words have power. The next loaves rise under your hands, shaped by rhythm, not rush. There's no timer, no oven light, just instinct feel, and that slight tug of heat across your forearms. The tanner, still hot from the earlier fire, accepts the new batch without complaint. You and it by now are in quiet agreement. The flames pulse just right. The loaves puff. And for a moment, the world narrows to dough heat and breath. You're crouched by the tanner again, watching the sacred loaves cool in their reed baskets when Enki calls over his shoulder. Don't forget the embers. You know what that means. Not just cleaning them out, reviving them. Because Babylonian bakers didn't start fires from scratch every morning. That was risky, wasteful, and frankly, annoying. Matches hadn't been invented. Flint sparked unreliably, and fire starters were rare and awkward. Know the real secret to keeping the bakery alive: ember management. Every night, as the fire died down, a baker would carefully scoop out a cluster of glowing coals, nestle them in a clay urn lined with ash, and tuck it somewhere warm, often near the center of the room, sometimes even under a pile of blankets. By morning, if all went well, those embers would still be glowing, ready to be coaxed back to life. This was the ember trick. You didn't make fire, you saved it, passed it from yesterday into today, like a thread between time. It's oddly poetic. Also terribly practical. You kneel beside the ash pit, where yesterday's coals were stashed. With a curved bronze scoop, you dig into the ash, pushing aside the cold white dust to find the prized little nuggets of charcoal, still faintly red at the core. You cradle them like they're kittens. Too much movement, and they crumble. Too little air, and they die. You carry them to the waiting tanner, where someone's already built a soft nest of dried reed strips and palm twigs. Carefully, you set the coals down, then blow. Gently, at first, then again. A wisp of smoke curls upward. The twigs shift, catch, then glow. The fire is reborn. The room watches you in silence. Even Enki, always grumbling, gives a subtle nod. This is the closest baking gets to magic. Historians still argue whether Babylon's embers were treated with special rituals. Some say salt was added to the ash bed to preserve the glow. Others suggest herbs were scattered in for flame purity. Most likely, it was trial and error combined with whispered tradition. Either way, fire wasn't just survival. It was heritage. You feed the new flame, slowly layering fuel from lightest to heaviest. You start with reed shavings, then palm fronds, then a few small dung cakes. The smoke curls thick and blue at first, but clears within minutes. The tanner begins to hum again, and you feel a little proud, like you've kept a promise. As the fire grows, a quiet rhythm returns to the bakery. Bakers resume their rounds. The second shift has taken over most of the mixing. You're now in ember watch mode, which mostly means tending to the tanner and making sure the temperature stays steady. Every so often, you lean in with your hand to check the heat, not touching the clay, just hovering a few inches from the wall. You can tell if it's ready by the feeling on your skin. Too hot. It stings your knuckles. Too cool. Your palm doesn't flinch. You toss in another dried frond and turn to find the young apprentice Seshu staring wide-eyed. "Want to try, you ask?" She nods. Carefully, she reaches her hand near the oven mouth. Too hot. Not yet. Wait until your nose itches. That's how you'll know. She laughs, but she watches. She learns, just like you once did. There's something special about passing these tricks down. Not through scrolls, not through school, but by feel, smell, sound. Like how you can hear the difference between a loaf that's still doughy inside and one that's just right. The former has a low thud. The latter, a crisp, almost musical pop, or how the crusts on sacred loaves should crack just once at the edge. Any more, and the dough was too dry. Any less, and it was underbaked. There's no thermometer, just your hands, your ears, your breath. That afternoon, as the embers thrive and the fire steadies, you take a moment to fix the ash scraper. The handles come loose, the bronze edge chipped from too many knocks against stone. You pull some twine from the tool shelf, wrap it around the base, and tighten the edge with a tap from your heel. Nothing fancy, just enough to last another week. Maybe two. Outside, the sun is high and harsh. But here in the smoky belly of the bakery, time feels slower. The tanner glows. The loaves cool. You pull up a stool, more of a stack of uneven bricks, really, and rest your elbows on your knees. Sometimes, you wonder what it would be like to leave the bakery. To walk beyond the gates of Babylon, follow the trade roads, see the mountains, the sea, but then the scent of sesame and ash drifts up again. The tanner crackles. A batch of loaves rise perfectly round and golden, and you think, maybe tomorrow. You're back at the shaping table, wrist deep in dough, when Enki mumbles something odd from across the room. You look up. He's hunched over a tablet, one of the old ones with chipped corners and sun-bleached cuneiform. He runs a finger across the lines slowly, like he's reading a bedtime story to himself. "What's that one?" you ask, mostly out of habit. "Old recipe," he mutters. "Real old." Says to whisper to the dough before baking. You blink, whisper. He nods without looking up. So it doesn't split. You laugh, but not too loudly. Because honestly, you've heard stranger things in this bakery. You've seen Enki draw little suns in the ash to calm the fire. You've seen bakers spin in a circle 3 times before feeding the tanner, claiming it gives the bread a better crust. So whispering to dough, sure, why not? Like, what do you say to it? Enki shrugs. Rise soft, bake golden. Something like that. You raise an eyebrow and go back to your dough. Still, as you press it flat and round the edges, you find yourself mumbling under your breath. Just in case. Historians still argue whether these whisper practices were religious superstitious or just baker folklore. Maybe they were all three. Maybe when you spend your days shaping something that's alive, fermenting, growing, changing, you can't help but talk to it. The recipe Enki's reading is strange even by ancient standards. It includes ingredients not used much anymore, like crushed carob pods and oil from bitter almonds. And there are instructions to leave the dough under moonlight for exactly 3 hours. Sounds like a love letter, not a recipe, you mutter. But Enki just grins. That's baking. You roll the dough with care, tracing the edge with your thumb, and flick a bit of flour off the surface. It puffs slightly as it rests, ready to rise. Nearby, another apprentice is fumbling with one of the heavier dough balls. She's pressing it too hard and the edges are cracking. You watch for a moment, then walk over. Gentle, you say, placing her hands correctly. It's not a punishment. It's a promise. She blinks confused. You smile. You'll get it. At the rear of the bakery, the supply shelves are low again. You head back to the storeroom, past the hanging reed mats and stacks of chipped bowls. There's a wax tablet nailed to the wall with flour inventories, and you take a charcoal stub to mark down what's missing barley again. Barley was the soul of Babylonian bread. Not wheat, not rye, barley. It was cheaper, easier to grow in the region's salty soil. And though its flavor was earthy and sometimes bitter, it made sturdy loaves that fed armies and priests alike. Most Babylonians didn't even taste wheat unless it was a festival or a bribe. Barley was for the people. Barley was for the gods. You sling a sack over your shoulder and head back toward the hearth. The tanner is waiting, always waiting. There's one dough batch left to go in. It's slightly overproofed, bubbling more than it should, a little too airy. You know what that means. It's going to talk back. Some loaves you slap into the oven, and they cling like loyal dogs. Others, they rebel, fall to the floor, curl up and die. You take a breath. Then, in a moment of theatrical bravado, you lean close to the dough and whisper, "Don't embarrass me today." The apprentice behind you snorts. You grin, slap the dough against the inner wall of the tanner, and pull your hand away fast. The loaf sticks. It stays. It sizzles. Victory. A little puff of steam rises as the crust begins to form. You back away, the heat brushing your cheeks. Someone claps softly. The bakery is quieter now. The second shift is finding its rhythm. You catch a snatch of song, low, rhythmic, probably something someone's grandmother used to hum while shaping breakfast loaves. You've heard hundreds of tunes in this bakery, and none of them ever repeat exactly. They're like the bread, familiar in shape, but always a little different. You sit down by the oven, wiping flour from your arms with the same rag you've used all week. It smells like smoke and sesame and faintly of onion. A clay cup of lukewarm tea appears beside you. Someone leaves it without a word. You nod in thanks, sip, and sigh. It's sweet, probably stolen honey. You pretend not to know. The loaf in the oven crackles as its crust tightens. The sound is tiny but satisfying, like a promise being kept. You lean back against the wall, the tanner's warmth at your side, the scent of baking in the air. Somewhere outside, a flute is playing. Or maybe it's just the wind slipping through a cracked door. Either way, the dough listened. And today, that's enough. You don't even realize how much time has passed until the tanner sighs. It's again the way it always does when it settles into its last heat cycle, less a breath, more. A slow release of everything it's held together all morning. You reach for the scraper to clear out the ash, but before you get there, you catch a whispered argument unfolding near the flour sacks. It's not a fight exactly. More of a heated gossip exchange, pun absolutely intended. Two apprentices, barely old enough to grow full beards, are muttering low and fast, tossing glances toward the alley door every few seconds. You wander over slowly, pretending to examine a nearby paddle and catch a few choice phrases, again this week, and brought it in wrapped in a cloth, and most damning Enki would boil him alive if he found out. You raise an eyebrow. Something wrong with the flour? They freeze like burnt loaves. One tries to casually lean on a shelf and misses it entirely. The other coughs and looks away. Just talking about moisture content, the taller one says. From the last batch? A bit uneven. You nod slowly. Right. Moisture. They scatter. You wait until they're gone, then check behind the flour sacks. Nothing obvious. But your baker's instinct, that fine-tuned sixth sense built on years of sniffing out burned crusts and misplaced date syrup, tells you there's something more going on. Later that day, when the main shift thins out and the tanner is on its cool-down burn, you spot one of those same apprentices slipping something behind the spice rack. You wait until he leaves, then casually make your way over, and there it is. A pouch. Not of flour, not of spice, but yeast. Real yeast. From somewhere far away, possibly even from the Egyptian traders who've been spotted hawking all kinds of strange and smelly things in the southern stalls. You pinch some between your fingers. It's potent, warm, almost wine-like in scent. Not the kind of yeast you'd get from soaking barley and hoping nature cooperates. This was brought in clandestinely, and technically, it's illegal. Well, not criminal, exactly. But temple bread is only allowed to rise the Babylonian way naturally, with wild fermentation from the air or specially prepared mash. Anything else, especially foreign yeast, is considered spoiling the divine process. But here's the thing, that foreign yeast, it works. Fast, predictable, uniform. You should tell Enki. Or you could test it first, quietly, as a culinary experiment, in the name of research, obviously. Historians still argue whether underground yeast trading was a real thing, or just the invention of nervous scribes trying to explain the suspiciously fluffy loaves found in temple storerooms. But the evidence yeast spores on ceramic jugs from across regions suggests something more than innocent fermentation was going on. You decide to bake a test loaf. You mix a small ball of dough with the smuggled yeast, shaping it carefully and hiding it at the back of the tanner near the lower heat zone. It's dangerous, but deliciously so. While it bakes, you return to your regular duties. Cleaning the paddles, sweeping the ash, flipping loaves to cool evenly. Nothing suspicious, but every so often, you sneak a glance toward the back of the oven. The dough is rising, not puffing slowly like barley dough usually does. Rising, quickly, uniformly, as if it knows exactly what to do and doesn't care who's watching. By the time you pull it out, the loaf is golden and flawless. It smells incredible. Like honey, even though you didn't add any. Like barley, but softer. Richer. You tear a piece off quietly and take a bite. It's perfect. Dangerously perfect. You wrap the rest in a cloth and stash it in your satchel. Enki doesn't need to know. Not yet. Maybe never. Because here in the quiet heat of the tanner, under the flour-dusted ceiling, and the watchful eyes of sleepy apprentices, you've just baked something forbidden. And delicious. You sit down on the old brick stool and lean back, chewing slowly. The tanner crackles softly. Outside, the sky begins to shift to gold. The day is winding down, and you, the quiet baker, just became part of the oldest underground food movement in history, yeast smuggling. You chuckle to yourself, wipe your hands on your tunic, and rise to prep the next batch. After all, a little rebellion pairs nicely with sesame crusts. You're halfway through stacking cooled loaves when a loud clang echoes through the bakery, followed by the unmistakable crash of pottery. You freeze half a loaf in hand and turn toward the source. There on the floor, near the doorway, is an apprentice blinking in disbelief at the broken remains of what used to be a very large, very expensive flour jar. Enki appears from nowhere. He doesn't yell. He doesn't shout. He just stares at the mess with a look so quiet and disappointed it could curdle milk. Whose ration was in that jar, he asks flatly. Nobody answers. That jar was part of the monthly grain delivery from the temple kitchens, officially allocated, stamped, and signed. Technically, sacred. practically taxed, and now shattered across the floor, its contents rapidly becoming floor seasoning. Enki sighs long and theatrical. Clean it, measure the loss, and tell the temple we had rats. You raise an eyebrow. Rats. He shrugs. They like barley too. This isn't the first time grain has mysteriously vanished. You remember the great flour storm from 2 years ago, when an entire week's worth of rations was accidentally dumped into the street by a new apprentice trying to show off his strength. The flour turned to paste in the rain, the alley smelled like beer for days, and the temple accountant showed up with a wax tablet and a face like dried fish. You help sweep the grain remnants into a basket, brushing carefully so at least some can be salvaged. Later, you'll sift it twice and bake it into the discount loaves reserved for the lower-tier scribes. They won't notice. Probably. Still, this incident reminds you of something: the bread tax. Yes, in Babylon, bread was taxed. Not just sold, taxed. Loaves were counted, tracked, and sometimes even stamped to prove their origin. Bakers working for temples or city officials often had quotas: 10 loaves for the priest's feast, 3 loaves for the guards on patrol, and so on. You've even heard of secret inspectors, men hired by the city, who'd wander into bakeries pretending to be customers only to report underbaked loaves or missing stamps. Whether this was true or just something Enki made up to keep apprentices nervous remains unclear. Historians still debate the extent of Mesopotamian bread taxation. Some believe only temple loaves were regulated, while others suggest full ration control across households. What's certain is that bread was serious business. You glance at the inventory tablet. One row's been scraped off hastily and rewritten. Another's been smudged to hide an inconvenient 0. And that yeast loaf you made earlier, absolutely unlisted. You quietly reach under your work table and move the cloth-wrapped loaf deeper into a storage basket nestled between old reed bundles and a chipped water jar, just in case. As the sun drifts lower, you return to shaping the afternoon batch. The dough is temperamental today, too stiff then, too sticky. You add water, then flour, then mutter something about dough spirits under your breath. One of the newer apprentices hears you. Dough spirits, she asks. You shrug. Enki swears they're real, says they live in the oven walls and mess with lazy bakers. She frowns. What do you do about them? Whistle while mixing. Apparently, they hate music. She nods solemnly and starts humming. You smile. The loaves go into the tanner a little unevenly, but you correct the angles with your paddle. A few minutes later, the crusts begin to set, and the familiar scent of success fills the room again. But as you're rotating the last batch, a figure appears in the doorway. It's not a temple runner, not an apprentice, not even a flour supplier. It's the accountant. He steps inside, sandals clicking on the packed dirt, and pulls out a smooth wax tablet and stylus. His face is unreadable. His hair is too perfect for someone who claims to work around grain. Enki emerges with a smile that does not reach his eyes. Afternoon, sir. We just finished your loaves. I'm not here for bread, the accountant says. There's a discrepancy. You freeze. The broken flour jar, the missing stamp, the yeast loaf. Your heart beats faster. You're suddenly very aware of how warm the tanner is and how much ash is clinging to your tunic. But the accountant doesn't notice, or doesn't care. He walks straight to the tally tablet, runs his finger down the list, and points to a row. This line. 17 loaves. You've marked 18. Enki leans and squints and grins. That's not a 1, that's a smudge. The accountant grunts, scratches out the number, and nods. Very well. Just like that, he turns and walks out, tablet in hand. Everyone exhales. You lean on the table and catch Enki's eye. He winks. We always bake 1 ghost loaf, just in case. You chuckle and go back to work. The ghost loaf, an unlisted extra baked to cover small accidents or small hungers might just be the bakery's most valuable tradition. And maybe, just maybe, the yeast loaf in the basket is this week's ghost. The accountant's sandals have barely left the alley when the bakery breathes again. Everyone goes back to their tasks, but now there's a little more laughter, a little less tension. Even the tanner seems to crackle in relief. You finish brushing the last of the flour off the table and look toward the doorway. Outside, the sky has shifted from gold to that soft gray blue of late afternoon. Shadows stretch long across the dusty street. Inside, it's still warm. Always is. The fire never fully dies, and the heat clings to the clay walls like it's part of the architecture. The bakery's air smells like barley ash and a hint of old stories. You walk past the resting loaves, stopping to press your thumb into the side of one. It springs back slowly, perfect, and then, from across the room, comes a yelp, followed by laughter, followed by a soft thud. You look up just in time to see two apprentices wrestling over a piece of burned crust, the flat, chewy kind that clings to the side of the oven like it knows it's someone's favorite. Enki doesn't even raise his head. If it ends in blood, you're both on dung duty tomorrow. The apprentices freeze, look at each other, and immediately drop the crust like it's cursed. Bread fights aren't exactly new. You've seen worse. You remember the time someone dared to steal a honey-coated loaf meant for the temple's chief scribe. The resulting scuffle knocked over 3 jars, 2 baskets, and one very unfortunate cat. The cat was fine. The apprentice was not. You step between the bickering pair and pick up the offending crust. If you're going to fight over bread, at least do it after closing. They grin sheepishly and return to sweeping. You tear the crust in half and take a bite. It's smoky crunchy and just salty enough to make you thirsty. Delicious. No wonder it caused a commotion. Nearby, a few more apprentices are deep in what can only be described as a competitive shaping session. The challenge: who can form the most symmetrical loaf without cracking the edges? One uses a carved shell to press a spiral design. Another uses a knotted reed to create a sunburst. You watch them with mild amusement until someone hands you a lump of dough. Your turn, they say. You accept the challenge with a sigh and begin shaping. You go simple, classic, round, gentle press at the center, soft brush of oil. But then, because you're feeling generous, or maybe just tired, you take your carving stylus and etch a tiny spiral at the corner. A quiet detail, a baker's signature. The apprentices nod in approval. Enki grumbles from across the room, show-offs. There's something strangely satisfying about shaping bread. You're not just forming food, you're forming time. Dough remembers every fold, every press. The loaf you make now carries the marks of your hands, your breath, your patience. Historians still debate whether these decorations were functional or symbolic. Some say they helped identify loaves. Others claim they were prayers and dough symbols meant to bring luck ward off mold, or simply say, "This is mine." Whatever the truth, there's no denying the beauty of it. A well-shaped loaf is a quiet kind of art. You pass your finished piece to an apprentice for baking and return to the back corner of the bakery where a stack of old tools waits for repair. A cracked paddle, a frayed reed fan, a chipped dough basin. You grab the fan and begin rewinding the reed strips with fresh twine. It's slow work, but oddly calming, like weaving back the threads of the day. As you work, you hear a soft voice behind you. "Can I try?" It's Seshu, the quiet apprentice with the careful hands. You nod and hand her the fan. She sits beside you and mimics your motions, fingers trembling at first, but steadying as the rhythm takes hold. "You ever think about leaving?" she asks, eyes focused on the twine. You pause. "Sometimes. But then I remember. I like the heat, the noise, the smell. She smiles. Same. You finish the last knot on the fan and set it aside. The tanner lets out a low pop like it's agreeing with you. The day winds down slowly. Loaves cool in rows. Embers flicker in their final dance. The apprentices sweep joke hum. Someone sings the barley song again, and this time more voices join in. You lean against the wall, tired but full. Today, you fought bread thieves, dodged accountants, smuggled yeast, avoided dung duty, and shaped something beautiful out of flour and fire. Not bad. The tanner is nearly done for the day. Its belly glows faintly now, a warm pulse instead of a raging heat. You've banked the embers under a layer of ash to preserve them, just like always. Tomorrow's fire will start from today's leftovers if no one forgets and pokes them too soon. You sit on the floor near the oven, hands resting in your lap, watching the shadows dance across the far wall. It's quiet now, except for the soft scuff of sandals and the occasional creak of the reed baskets settling under cooling loaves. And then you hear a low murmur from the front of the bakery. Someone's haggling, loudly, which is always a bad sign this late in the day. You get up and peek around the corner. It's a merchant, of course, dressed in layers of linen, dyed a suspiciously expensive shade of blue, with a wax tablet in one hand and a smug grin on his face. He's pointing at the display rack like he owns it. I'll take 5 of those round ones. No, not the cracked ones. And make sure they're fresh. He doesn't look at anyone when he speaks, just keeps flipping his stylus like it's a scepter. Enki is standing nearby, arms crossed. Those are reserved for the scribes, he says flatly. The merchant waves a dismissive hand. I'll pay double. Enki doesn't blink. Triple. And I'll think about it. The merchant squints. You're bluffing. Enki gestures toward you. Ask the fire. You raise an eyebrow but say nothing. Historians still argue whether Babylonian bakeries operated under fixed temple pricing or the chaotic bartering whims of local merchants. The reality was probably both. Some days, your loaves were weighed and tallied by scribes. Other days, they vanished into satchels in exchange for coins, spices, or favors. Today, it's one of those days. You hand over the loaves after Enki finally agrees to the price. The merchant leaves smug and satisfied. Enki mutters, "We're buying new reed baskets with that." Fair enough. You return to the back and check on the dough for tomorrow. The fermentation pots are cool, tucked into the corner where the wall stays shaded. You lift the lid on one and take a cautious sniff. Good. A little sour, a little sweet, still alive. You give the mixture a slow stir, watching the bubbles rise and fall. This, more than anything, is the true heart of the bakery. Not the oven, not the flour, not even the shaping, the starter. Some bakeries guard theirs for generations. Enki claims his has been going since before he was born. Older than half the priests, he says. Smarter, too. You're not sure if he's joking. You cover the pot and move to the bench where a stack of broken reed trays waits to be rewoven. You sit cross-legged fingers working through the strips like you've done 1,000 times before. It's meditative. The same over-under motion. The same soft creak of the reeds. The same satisfaction when the tray holds its shape. Someone passes you a cup of water. You drink, wipe your mouth, and keep weaving. Outside, the street is winding down. The clop of donkey hooves, the distant splash of water from the canal, the echo of someone arguing about onions. All of it folds into the lull of evening, and inside the loaves are lined up in careful rows. Some go to the temple, some to the scribes, a few to the merchants, fewer still to the bakers themselves. You reach under the bench and pull out the cloth-wrapped yeast loaf you stashed earlier, still warm, still fragrant, still technically not on the books. You tear off a small corner chew slowly. It's even better now. Soft crumb chewy crust, just a hint of sweetness from the barley. You break off another piece and hand it to Seishu, who's been reshaping a cracked paddle nearby. She takes a bite and blinks. That's not from today's batch. You say nothing. She looks at you. Where'd you get it? You smile. Trade secret. She grins, wipes her hands on her apron, and joins you on the bench. The two of you sit there chewing in silence, surrounded by cooling loaves and flickering shadows. No one says it, but you both know at this moment, right here, is the reason you bake. Not the fire, not the flour, not even the gods. Just bread. Quiet bread, shared. Evening settles over the city like a wool blanket, soft, heavy, and full of tiny murmurs. The street noise fades, the tanner cools, and the scent of fresh bread lingers in the walls. You stretch your back with a long groan, wiping your flour-crusted hands on your tunic, and look around. The day's final loaves are neatly stacked. The paddle edges hang on their hooks, and Enki finally has sat down. He's leaned back against a flour sack, like it's a throne, eyes half shut, muttering to himself about sesame prices. You're sweeping ash into a basket when he speaks again, louder this time. You know he says a loaf once bought me a cow. You pause. A whole cow. He nods sagely. Big one, too. Horns like sickles. You raise an eyebrow. It was a wedding, he explains. Bride's father wanted soft bread for the banquet, none of that temple crust. I made him 12 loaves, sesame, fig, and honey. He cried. Gave me a cow on the spot. Was it alive, you ask? Very. You grin? What'd you do with it? Sold it, bought more flour. You shake your head, laughing. Of course he did. Bartering was common in Babylon, especially with food. While silver was used for larger transactions, most daily, trade relied on goods. Bread could be exchanged for onions, cloth oil, even favors, if you baked for the right priest. A well-shaped loaf could feed a family, or in Enki's case, build an empire of flour, one cow at a time. You finish sweeping, dump the ash into the pit outside, and return to clean the paddle handles. They're warm to the touch, smooth from years of use. You run your thumb over the faded carvings on one, a sunburst on the back, a tiny fish etched into the side. Probably some apprentice's idea of personalization a century ago. Maybe it worked. Seishu passes behind you, balancing a tray of reject loaves. These ones are flat, overbaked, or strangely shaped good for animal feed or trade with the fig vendor who loves crusty bits with his morning mash. You watch her arrange them carefully, not wasting a single slice. That's another rule here, nothing wasted. Even the crumbs get swept into a basin for gruel. Enki says wasting bread offends the grain spirits. You're not sure if that's true, but you don't test it. The smell in the bakery has changed now. It's deeper, toastier, the scent of heat fading, a kind of sleepy perfume. You sit back and take it in, letting your muscles relax for the first time all day. A flicker of movement catches your eye near the far shelf. One of the temple cats, striped lean with an attitude that says, "You work for me," jumps up, sniffs the nearest loaf, and then curls into a tight spiral like it owns the place. No one shoos it away. The cats are good luck and good pest control. You once watched one casually catch a rat, twice its size, without so much as a growl. It left the tail by the door like a receipt. As you polish the last paddle and lean it back on the wall, Enki speaks again, softer now. You ever notice the quiet after baking? You nod. It's like the bread sings and then sleeps. You're not sure that's how bread works, but you don't argue. In a way, he's right. The bakery has its own rhythm. Noise, heat, smoke, and then silence. Rest. Some historians claim baking in ancient Mesopotamia was strictly utilitarian, daily rations, temple dues, survival. But those historians never sat in a bakery after sundown, listening to the fire exhale and watching shadows curl over rows of golden loaves. It's not just food, it's presence. Something made with hands, heat, and breath. You walk to the back and check on the stored dough for tomorrow. Still cool, still rising, still alive. You whisper to it, just softly out of habit. See you in the morning. Back in the main room, someone started humming. Low, almost a lullaby. You don't recognize the tune, but your foot taps to it anyway. You find a spot near the warmest wall, sit down cross-legged, and close your eyes for a moment. The tanner glows faintly behind your lids. The smell of sesame and barley floats in your hair. The day is done. And somewhere outside, someone is tearing into one of your loaves, crust cracking, steam rising. Without ever knowing how many hours it took, how many embers were tended, how many small prayers were whispered into dough. And you're okay with that, because in Babylon, bread doesn't need applause. It just needs to rise. You wake the next morning before the first sunbeam touches the floor, not because anyone shook you, but because the tanner calls you. Or maybe it's the bakery itself. A place like this doesn't need a rooster. It just has a rhythm. And if you've worked here long enough, your body learns the tune. You stretch out your legs with a crack and groan, brushing the flour dust off your tunic. Someone's already stirred the starter. Probably seshu, a good sign. That means the fire's been fed, the water jars refilled, and someone remembered to chase the cats off the grain sacks. A small miracle. You step into the heart of the bakery. It's still dim, the fire just beginning to wake, licking the base of the tanner with soft orange light. The air is cool now, crisp with morning quiet. For a brief moment, everything is still. Then the door curtain rustles, and Enki arrives muttering something about dreams and backaches. I dreamed I was eating my own shoe, he says without looking at you. Turns out it was a piece of last week's crust. You stifle a laugh and hand him a cup of warm barley tea. He grunts in approval, then gestures toward the starter jar. Looks good. You nod. Seishu stirred it. She's got the right hands. Soft, steady. He pauses. Not like you. You shape dough like it owes you money. You bow theatrically. The dough and I have an agreement. He chuckles and walks over to the fire, inspecting the embers like a general reviewing his troops. Still breathing, he murmurs. Good. You begin your morning routine. Flour measuring, mixing, water prepping, oil jars. Every movement feels familiar, like tracing a favorite pattern with your fingertip. The tools, the smells, even the weight of the baskets, it's all the same. And yet, every day is new. A little warmer, a little cooler, a little more chaotic. You take a moment to inspect the flour today, a bit coarse, not as finely ground as yesterday's batch. You make a note on the wall tablet with a dab of ash, just to mark, nothing dramatic. But Enki will understand. The apprentices begin to arrive yawning and half-dressed. One forgot his apron. Another's sandals are tied with twine. You toss him a proper strap, and he mumbles thanks. Within minutes, the bakery hums again. Dough is slapped, paddles thump, firewood cracks. But it's not rushed. There's a sleepy ease to it, like the bread knows it has time. You glance at the reed mat where your hidden yeast loaf once lived. It's gone now, probably eaten quietly without credit. That's fine. The secret's still yours. But as you turn, you notice something curious. A new mark on the wall tablet, one more tally than usual written in careful strokes. Someone is keeping track. And they're not you. You raise an eyebrow, then glance across the room. Seishu avoids your gaze just for a moment. Then she smiles. You're not sure if that means she's in on the secret, or if she's simply noticed something off. Either way, there's a flicker of understanding between you, quiet flower dusted, and possibly dangerous. You let it go, for now, because right now, you have dough to shape. You press your hands into the fresh batch and feel the softness of the barley, the pull of the water, the whisper of fermentation. It's alive, ready, waiting. You begin to shape the first round, moving slowly, deliberately. Your fingers know what to do. Your palms apply just enough pressure. Your thumbs tuck the edges in a perfect spiral. The loaves rest on the floured board, rising gently like breath. One by one, you build the morning's offering. Enki passes behind you, nodding once. Better, he says. Still too tight on the left. You don't argue. He's not wrong. You place the first loaf into the tanner, the fire hissing in welcome. It sticks perfectly. Another joins it, then another. The scent begins to fill the room again. Warm, nutty, familiar. Outside, the street stirs. A boy shouts. A woman laughs. A dog barks once, then thinks better of it. And here in the bakery, the dance continues. Loaf after loaf. Flame after flame. The sun rises higher, and so does the bread. You're elbow deep in dough when a shadow falls across the entrance, tall, cloaked, and moving far too carefully to be irregular. You glance up as the curtain lifts and reveal a scribe. Not just any scribe either. This one wears robes pressed too neatly for bakery weather, and his hands are suspiciously clean. He steps into the room like he's afraid of stepping on it. Enki spots him, wipes his hands on his tunic, and mutters, "Here we go." You stifle a groan. Temple scribes mean tablets, tallies, and tedium. You've never seen one lift a loaf in his life, but they somehow know exactly how much barley should be used per loaf and what temperature an oven ought to be, according to scrolls not experience. The scribe clears his throat. There have been inconsistencies. You give Enki a sidelong glance. He shrugs. There's always inconsistencies. That's what makes it bread. The scribe doesn't blink. Temple loaves from this bakery have been noted as puffier than recorded standards. You almost laugh. Puffier. What does he want? Flatbread blueprints. He steps closer, sniffing the air like an inspector general of barley. They also report a new aroma. Something sweeter. You feel that flicker of recognition, a puff of nervous heat in your chest. Could he be referring to that loaf? The one with the foreign yeast? You casually shift in front of the basket where the starter jars rest. Seishu, on the far side of the room, starts coughing suspiciously loudly. The scribe walks slowly along the shelves, eyeing everything with scholarly suspicion. Pots, paddles, even the cats. One cat hisses at him. You silently cheer. He stops at the fermentation shelf. These starters, he says, pointing with his stylus, are temple approved. Enki walks over, nods once. This one's been with us since the flood. Not untrue, just possibly referencing a smaller local flood. The scribe frowns, but moves on. His stylus taps against his tablet rhythmically. You imagine its writing loaves appear suspiciously delicious. Further surveillance required. He finally turns to leave. Ensure tomorrow's offerings are within standard density. The gods prefer consistency. You offer your most respectful nod, as do the ovens. And just like that, he's gone vanishing into the dusty street like a spilled sack of flour. The bakery exhales in unison. Enki groans. If the gods want density, they can bake their own. You return to your dough hand steady, but your thoughts keep circling back to that phrase, a sweeter aroma. You hadn't added anything extra that day. It was the yeast. You know it. And now the scribe suspects something. You should be worried, but instead you feel proud. Not because you broke a rule, but because the bread worked, because that one loaf sang a little louder. You finish shaping your current dough round and mark it with a spiral, your spiral, a quiet signal, a baker's wink. Seishu slides beside you, whispering he knows. You nod, he suspects. She glances at the door. What now? You shrug. We make tomorrow's bread. Same as always. Because that's the rhythm here. Flame flour fire. Loaf whisper crust. You don't stop baking because someone sniffs too hard. You just get better at the scent. The rest of the day flows like a stream through the worn stone. The second shift arrives. The embers are stoked. New loaves are shaped glazed, fired, cooled. Seishu adds just a pinch of honey to one batch. Not enough to change it, just enough to make the crust glisten. You say nothing. Enki notices, raises an eyebrow, then turns back to his paddle. Outside, the sun lowers. Inside, the fire flickers, the last loaves cool, and the stories of the day settle like dust. And tucked quietly under the shaping bench, wrapped in linen marked with your spiral, is another yeast loaf. You'll leave it in the alley at dawn. No name, just bread. Let the gods figure it out. The tanner is cold now. Not cold as in lifeless never that, but cool enough to touch. You press your hand gently to its outer wall and feel the faintest memory of heat lingering in the clay, like a ghost of the fire that roared there only hours ago. You've swept the floor twice. The baskets are stacked. The broken paddle's been mended again with a fresh length of twine. The starter jars are tucked in the cool corner with their lids tied snug. The bakery is quiet. It's your turn to stay late to close the place down. Enki has long since gone muttering about his aching joints and promising to return with knees like a teenager's by sunrise. You doubt it. Seishu's asleep in the side room, curled beside a half-finished batch of shaped dough she couldn't quite let go. She'll wake in the night, adjust it in her sleep, and rise before dawn like nothing happened. She's like that, quietly determined, like the dough itself. You take a slow walk around the room just to feel it one last time before locking up. The tanner's mouth is dark and open. Inside, the embers have faded to pale gray, like chalk scattered at the base. You rake them gently, sifting through for anything still warm enough to save. You gather a few faintly glowing coals and tuck them into the ember jar, layering them with dry ash. Tomorrow, when you blow gently across the top, you'll know if they survived. Across the room, the shelf of temple loaves gleams faintly in the moonlight, slipping through the vent slits in the wall. Each loaf is wrapped and sealed with the priestly spiral, their crusts cooled to perfection. You've made dozens of these by now, hundreds maybe, and yet they never look the same twice. You reach under the bench and pull out one last cloth bundle, the forbidden one, the yeast loaf. You unwrap it slowly, like a gift. Still warm, still fragrant. Not as puffed as it was this morning, but the crust has set beautifully, and the inside is soft when you press your fingers into the base. This one isn't going to the market. This one's going to a woman who lives 2 alleys over, who trades herbs and barley vinegar, and whose son has been sick all week. You overheard her at the well speaking in that tired voice mothers use when they're doing everything at once. She said he could barely keep down stew. But maybe he'll keep down this. You tuck the loaf into a reed basket and wrap it tightly. On your way out, you'll leave it near her doorway. You won't knock. You don't need to. Because that's how the best loaves travel here quietly anonymously with no temple stamps or tally marks. Just crust, crumb, and care. You lean against the doorframe for a long moment, watching the last flickers of the coals vanish into themselves. The bakery smells like smoked barley and rest. You close your eyes and take a long breath in. Then you blow the lamp out. Darkness folds in, and with it peace. Wind down approx. 300 words. The tanner cools now. Its breath has slowed its fire sleeps beneath ash. The scent of bread still hangs in the air, faint and sweet, like the last notes of a song that's ended long after you stopped listening. You feel the stillness in your body now, the soft heaviness in your arms, in your legs, in your chest. Like flour dust settling over everything slowly, gently, until all the noise of the day is quieted. The clay walls no longer glow, but they hold the memory of heat, just as your hands hold the memory of kneading, just as your breath remembers the rhythm of shaping, folding, rising. You think of the loaves, stacked in their baskets, each one a small warm story that began with water and grain and ended with silence. Outside, the night has stretched itself across the rooftops of the city. The sky is the color of ash. A single reed torch flickers somewhere far away, casting long shadows against a stone wall. And here in this little room of fire and flour, you rest. The world is still turning slowly, but the bread has been made. The embers are tucked away. The fire will wait for you. And so, my friend, should you. Sleep now. Sleep as the bread sleeps. Sleep as the fire sleeps. Sleep as the stars sleep over Babylon.